Welcome to Excel for Accountants, formulas, functions, formatting to build accounting templates. Now, if you want to download this Excel file here, and there's a start file and a finished file so you can follow along, click on the link below the video. Hey, this is the 2017 Washington Association of Accounting and Tax Preparers Tacoma Accounting Conference at La Quinta in July 12th. Now, we're actually going to have two videos at this conference. The first one is about formulas, functions, and formatting. And this entire list of topics, if you scroll down, there's 44 amazing accounting Excel topics to cover. The second video will be Power Query and pivot tables to import and clean data and build reports. Now, this entire list of 44 topics is below the video. If you look below the video in the Show More area, there's a table of contents with time hyperlinks so you can jump to any part of the video you'd like. Not only that, but here in the Excel workbook, every one of these topics is linked to the sheet in the workbook. So if you want to jump to the today and eDate functions example, you simply click and it jumps to that sheet. Notice it jumped over to dates, number formatting, formulas. And on each sheet, the topics is a hyperlink to jump back to the table of contents. So that means there's two table of contents, one here in the Excel workbook and one below the video where you can jump to different parts of the video. Now, this first video, the first 15 topics, I'm going to review all of the basics of Excel while showing you how to build Excel accounting templates. And then the remaining part of the video is just all sorts of great Excel accounting topics. Now, our first topic is going to be about keyboards. It's not going to be about features or functions. It's about keyboards. Because in order to be efficient in Excel, you gotta know keyboards. Now, I'm actually going to click right on this and jump over to the sheet. It jumps right over here. I'm on the Add Quickly Keyboard sheet. Now, the very first keyboard I want to show you is, notice the active cell is A2. That means the selected cell. If I scroll down to do something, to look at something, and notice I haven't clicked anywhere, we oftentimes do this. But now I'd like to just jump back to that active cell, use Control Backspace. Not only does it work when you have a cell selected, but later when we're in the middle of creating a formula and we highlight all the way down, we can jump back to the cell we're editing using Control Backspace. Now, perhaps the most important keyboard in all of Excel is, how do you jump to the bottom of a data set, or how do you highlight all the way to the bottom of the data set? Now, we have some sales and cost of goods sold, and on this sheet I'm going to add over here. But I want to know how tall this table is. The keyboard to jump down to the bottom of this column, meaning all the way down till it sees the first empty cell, is Control down arrow. Look at that, 12,000 rows of sales and cost of goods sold. Now, I used the wheel on my mouse to scroll down. What if I use Control down arrow here? Well, it didn't find anything, so it just kept going to the bottom of the spreadsheet. Not only that, but I can do Control right arrow. Wow, that is the approximately 17th billion cell in this entire one spreadsheet. Now, the keyboard to go back to cell A1 is Control Home. Now, that's another important keyboard because a lot of times we're looking somewhere, and I just want to jump not back to the active cell, but to A1, so Control Home. Now, I'd like to highlight. Notice we have, oh, look at this, a bunch of numbers, and I want to add some number formatting. Now, the next topic is number formatting as facade. Now, most people in the world who use Excel think they know what number formatting is. But unless you think of it as a facade, that means when we apply number formatting, it puts something on the surface of the spreadsheet that is different than the underlying number. So if you don't understand number formatting as a facade, you run the risk of error. All right, let's just prove that to ourselves. But first, I want to highlight the top two cells, and now I need to jump all the way down and highlight everything. So instead of just Control arrow, we hold Shift also, Control Shift down arrow. And just like that, I've highlighted down 12,000 rows. Now in the Home Ribbon tab, Number Group, we have a great drop-down for the most common number formattings. Now I want to do currency, but this is one type of currency. So another way to do this, if you want more control, is to use the keyboard Control-1 to open up the Format Cells dialog box. Now number, alignment, font, border. Wow, this is a great one for accountants. We use that all the time. Fill and protection. Control-1 opens up this so we can get to any one of those hundreds of different options. Now I'm going to click on currency, and the nice thing about this dialog box is I can choose the way I want to display the negative number, how many decimal places, and symbol. I'm going to accept the default. Sometimes accountants like to see the parentheses, but I'm going to click OK. And there we go. Wait a second. How is that facade? The way it's facade is it put a dollar sign, but not in the cell. Please go look up at the formula bar. There's no dollar sign. Not only that, but it looks like it, and I'm going to use the wrong word here, it looks like it rounded it. It did not round it. It just displayed it so that only 2 decimals are showing. We can clearly see that the extra decimals are still in the cells. Now later we'll learn how to remove extraneous decimals because sometimes that can get us in trouble with our calculations. Now our next step is I simply want to add all of the sales and then add all of the cost of goods sold. Now most of us either type equals SUM. We don't need to do that anymore. I'm going to click Escape. Escape always reverts back to whatever the cell was before you put it in edit mode. The other way that people invoke the sum function is to go to Home, over to Editing, and there's the sum function. If I hover my cursor, let me do this again, hover my cursor, you can see the keyboard is Alt equals. Now there's 450 functions in Excel, but only the sum function has the keyboard. Ready? Alt equals. Alt equals puts the sum function in. Now I'm very carefully going to click in the top cell, and we're going to use that same keyboard, Control-Shift, down arrow, 12,000 rows instantly. Now I'm going to use Control-Backspace to jump back to the active cell. And look at that. Now instead of hitting Enter, since my goal is to put this thing in the cell and move to the right, I'm going to hit the Tab key. Uh-oh, they put a fence up. We cannot see. That simply means that the column is not wide enough. I can come up, and between D and E, I can click and drag like that, or I can double click and it best fits. All right, you ready? Alt equals. Oh, it guessed wrong. But remember, when you are putting a range or any cell reference into a formula, as long as the dancing ants are dancing around, you're in full edit mode. Now, I can click over here, Control-Shift down arrow, Control-Backspace. That is amazing, and Enter. Double click. Just that keyboard alone can save so much time. Now, here are some of the most important keyboards also. Control-C, V, X. Lots of people right-click. Lots of people use the clipboard. Don't do it. Not only are these faster, but these keyboards work in lots of places where right-click or the clipboard will not, like sometimes in dialog boxes. Another great keyboard is Control-Z for undo. Anytime you want to undo something, don't go up. Notice I don't even have the undo button because I altered my quick access toolbar to remove it. But normally there's that little blue back arrow. Don't do it. Control-Z is what you do. Control-Y is redo. Not only that, but another amazing keyboard is F12. Why? Because since 2007, they made us go to File, Save As. Then we have to pick our folder, then this thing pops up. That's just too many clicks. The keyboard to get straight to save as, escape, escape, F12. So there it is. Every time you save as, you've saved 3 clicks. All right, now let's go over to our next sheet, dates, number formatting, and formulas. Now here's our topics, and here are our notes. I'm going to scroll down. We, in essence, have 3 templates we want to complete here. Now I accidentally left the formula here. No problem. Control-Shift down arrow, delete. That's fast. All right, so here we have a days past due template. It's simply the supplier name, the invoice amount, the due date. We want to put today's date in and then calculate the number of days past due. Now, if we want this to automatically update, meaning every time we update this, we just want our days past due to tell us the current days past due, then we want a dynamic date using today function. Now, I see the function in blue in my dropdown. I'm not going to type the whole thing out. I'm not even going to get my mouse and double click. I'm going to hit the tab key. This is an argumentless function, so I simply close parentheses. Now I'm going to control enter instead of enter. If I hit enter, that means I have to click back up and then copy it down. Anytime your goal is to put something in the cell and keep the cell selected because you're going to do something to the cell, please use control enter rather than enter. Now that cell is highlighted. We can see the green outline all the way around. And in the lower right-hand corner, that little green box is called the fill handle. This right here, this is the selection cursor. When you move your selection cursor over the fill handle, it turns to what Bill Gates calls a crosshair. I like to call it, instead of a crosshair, an angry rabbit. And the angry rabbit is awesome because remember, I can click and drag, and it will automatically copy it down. Now, wait a second. That was a lot of rows. That took much too much time. So I'm going to Control-Z to undo that. What we really want to do when we have a template that has data all the way down is simply move the selection cursor over the fill handle. And with the angry rabbit, double click. It automatically copied it all the way down, and it knew to stop because there was an empty cell. Now notice I used the wheel on my mouse. I really shouldn't have done that. I should have double-clicked and send it down. Notice the active cell. I should have just done Control down arrow. And there we go. Control up arrow. Now today, that's what you want when you want a dynamic date. But in accounting, the historical date is very important. Now for this particular template, we probably want a dynamic date. But in lots of other situations, we want to hard code the date. And there it is, one of the greatest accounting keyboards ever. Let's see, I even put it up here in bold because it's so important. Control semicolon. Control semicolon. That puts in today's date. Now I can Control enter. And I can double click and send it down. But wait a second, that didn't work. Now we're going to see this a few times. The amazing Smart Tag. Now in this situation, when I hover over the Smart Tag, there's a little triangle pointing downward. When I click on it, later we'll see this amazing feature down here. But here I want to stop it from filling the series. Whoa, wait a second. That's really cool if you're creating a calendar, right? It automatically, when you double-click a date or copy a date, it increments. But here, I want to stop it from incrementing, so I click Copy Cells. Now another important date and time trick. Remember, Control semicolon is today's date. But Tab, what if you wanted Control semicolon but the current time? Then you type a space and do Control Shift semicolon. That is totally cool. And enter. There we get our fence. That means I need to click and drag. Now the days past due. Well, before I do this formula, I want to tell you what a date really is. Now I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to control semicolon and then enter. Then I'm going to type 1/1/1900, control enter, and I'm going to copy it down. And notice it will increment. Now, why did I do that? Because really, when I put a date in the cell, look up here. It has date number formatting. Date number formatting. So if we look up to the formula bar, it looks like there's a 7, a slash, a 7/2017 in the cell. Meaning, remember, number formatting is a facade on the surface of the spreadsheet. It looks like that's what's sitting underneath in the cell. But in this case, it's not. That's why you have to be so careful with number formatting. That's why in your head, you have to think of it as a facade. Now I'm going to show you a great trick here. If I highlight these, right at the top in the number group in the Home Ribbon tab, right at the top, General. Notice no specific formatting. I wish they called it the eraser for number formatting, because when you apply General, it erases any number formatting that you might have applied. So when I click General, what? 42,723? 1, 2? You got it. Dates are really serial numbers. And I'm going to control Z to undo that. Serial numbers that count. There's the first day in Excel's universe, 1/1/1900. There's the second day. And there, if I control Y to undo the undo or use redo, today is 42,923 days since December 31st, 1899. Now, why in the world did they do that? Because of date math. Because there's a number underneath, I'm allowed to subtract or add dates to calculate the days between dates or adding dates and numbers to dates and things like that. Now, when I control Z, you've got to be aware that this is a case, and same with time. Time is another one where you cannot see what's actually in the cell up in the formula bar. Now, let's put this into action. Notice we have a later date in history, and we're going to subtract an earlier date in history. So it will give me the difference between the two. Now, we're going to do a formula here, and all formulas start with an equal sign. And there's a few ways we can put cell references into our formula. We can click with our mouse, and then I'm going to subtract, and then click with our mouse. Now I'm going to click Escape. Usually when the cell references are really close, that's the slow way. The fast way is to do equal sign, arrow, arrow, minus arrow, arrow, arrow. That is the rule. If the cell references are close, use the arrow keys on your number pad. If they're far away, you use a mouse. Now my goal is to put this in the cell and copy it down, so I Control Enter and double click and send it down. Control down arrow to go all the way down to the bottom. I'm going to hit the F2 key. I'm just verifying that the cell references that I put into the formula are working. Now, actually, those are called relative cell references. Notice D69 minus C69. Now, when you're copying a formula, you do not want to think of it that way. You don't even want to call it out that way. That really is 1, 2 cells to my left minus 1, 2, 3 cells to my left. Escape, Control up arrow, down arrow, and F2. Notice up here, it looks like it's D20 minus C20, but it's really 2 to my left minus 3 to my left. Now notice that means Enter F2, Enter F2. Those cell references are moving relatively throughout the copy action. All right, that was our days past due template. How about this one? We have borrower, an amount, an issue date. There is the term in days. And we simply want to calculate the maturity date. Equal sign, arrow, arrow. Remember, underneath that date is a number, so I'm simply allowed to add using plus and then arrow. Control Enter, and there is the maturity date. Double click and send it down. Control down arrow, F2. I'm verifying that the formula is working. That's pretty cool. Control up arrow. Definitely, when the spreadsheet was invented in 1979 by Bricklin and Frankston, the fact that they thought enough in advance about dates and that they put numbers underneath so we can do date math Definitely one of the more amazing things that Excel can do. Now here's our last example for dates. We have employee and hire date. And we need to figure out the pension vest date. And our rule in the company is 5 years ahead. Now I definitely wouldn't want to do this 5 years ahead manually. I don't even want to use the date and month and day function. There's a special function that can take a date and jump a certain number of months ahead. Equals ED tab. The start date, there it is. Comma. Uh-oh, this argument says months, and we have years. No problem. We'll take 5 times 12 and copy the formula down. Now, let's just click either with your mouse or up arrow, and that formula will not work because that is a relative cell reference that says, please always look 1, 2, 3 above. If I were to copy this formula down right now, down the column, that cell reference would move. Notice when I copy it to the next cell, this 3 above would move right there, and it would be incorrect. Now let's prove that to ourselves. I'm going to finish the formula times 12, close parentheses, Control Enter, and I'm going to copy it down just one row. Click in that cell, F2. That is not what we want. That blue one is correct, meaning always look 1 to the left. So we're going to have to fix our formula up in that cell right there and lock the cell reference. Now I clicked Escape, Delete. I'm going to click in the cell and redo it. Equals ED tab, left arrow, comma, up arrow 3 times. And now we need to learn how to lock it. And the way you do it is you hit the F4 key. That F4 key puts the secret code in, which is $signs. There's a $sign in front of the column reference P and the row reference 17. That means no matter where we copy this formula, it will always be locked on P17. Now, relative cell references, as we copy the formula, they move relatively. Locked, they just remain locked. Now let's finish the formula times 12. And wait a second. I typed a number into a formula. The rule is if a formula input can change, like the 5 or the date, we use cell references to refer to the formula input. But if the formula input is not going to change, and in our case it's not going to change, you can simply type it into the formula. Now that's actually called Excel's golden rule. And if you look up in the notes, that's listed there. Now let's close parentheses, Control Enter, double click and send it down, Control down arrow and F2. Now we definitely want to always go to the bottom of the column and verify. Because, for example, what if I forgot to lock it? Then I would have noticed in the last cell that it wasn't locked, and I could have fixed it. All right, Escape, Control Home. Now I want to scroll over here and emphasize something about Excel's golden rule. Notice, hard-coded in, formula input is in the cell with a label, and we referred to them with cell references. No problem. Look at this. Mitsuko, that's the incorrect hire date. They actually got hired on the 16th, so I simply change it, hit Enter, and that works. Not only that, but the person who told us 5 years, they weren't reading the contract. It's actually 6 years. So when I change that and hit Enter, everything updates. That's Excel's golden rule. Not only that, the #1 source of errors throughout 3 decades of spreadsheet history is when people incorrectly hard code variables into formulas. Now, this is not the best example. Some of the famous examples have to do with interest rates and things like that, where they hard code them in, or tax rates and they change. And so we follow Excel's golden rule. Number can change. We put it into a cell, label it, and refer to it with a cell reference. All right, now I'm going to Control ZZ. Control Home. All right, so on this sheet, we saw a lot of date-related tricks formatting, functions, formulas, and even some cool keyboards. All right, let's go to the next sheet, payroll quickly and round. Now, most of us do payroll in some other system or have some system do for us. But occasionally we have to make calculations. So what we want to learn here, and I shouldn't have had all of these in here. Notice, bloop, luckily I'm deleting those. What we want to see here is we're going to have to make a calculation, and we're multiplying gross pay times tax rate. And yes, as we copy the formula down, we're going to need relative cell reference, and this one will have to be locked. But we're going to run into some trouble here when we're multiplying decimals, especially when right here, that 0.75, that's past the penny position. Anytime we're multiplying decimals like this, and we might have extraneous decimals, we better be careful because all of these results we're actually going to add. So we want to talk about the importance of the round function. Now let's first just make our base calculation. So I'm going to click here, equals left arrow times right arrow F4. That calculation should work. Control Enter. I'm going to double click and send it down. Uh-oh, double click and send it down. In the latest version of Excel, it used to stop right there, but now because we're connected with column headers or field names at the top, it thought this was the bottom, but no problem. Control Z, and now I'm going to copy it down. Now I want to come to the bottom and Alt equals. I see the dancing ants are surrounding the correct cells, so I hit Enter. Now the problem with what we did is there was already number formatting applied. Not only that, but if I click right there and look up to the formula bar, I have a formula. I can't tell if there's any extraneous decimals. Now if I was given this template, I would immediately highlight these cells, go up to the drop-down and apply General. I am going to teach you the keyboard for General since it is so important when diagnosing number formatting problems. Control-Shift, either grave accent or tilde applies the general number formatting. In essence, it's our eraser to remove all the number formatting. I see lots of extraneous decimals. Anytime that happens, and we're using these formula results in a subsequent formula, you run the risk of an error here because that sum function right there does not see number formatting. So if I escape and Control Z, number formatting. Down here, that sum function does not see the number formatting. All formulas look at the underlying number. That means sum is adding all those extraneous decimals. Anytime you have that situation, you run the risk of an error. So let's redo our formula. Equals. Now I'm going to hit F4. We know that's going to give us extraneous decimals, and we want to use the function that will round automatically for us. Now, a lot of times you have to guess the name of the function, like sum or average or PMT for payment on a loan. Round, luckily they named it smartly. Now if I type R, O, I can see right away that there's a bunch of round functions. I can use my down arrow to get to the function I think is the correct one. I can read the screen tip. Rounds a number to a specified number of digits. Now this function does our standard rounding. Now notice it's highlighted in blue. I'm going to hit Tab. Now the round function requires a number. It's almost always some formula that we create, and then it needs to know the number of digits. So very carefully at the end, not the selection cursor, you got to make sure you see your I-beam cursor. Click, type a comma to get to the next argument. Now number of digits. What do we do here? I always start at the decimal and count on my fingers. 1, 2. Since I'm rounding to the penny, I need to put a 2. If I was starting here, I could go 1, 2, 3, 4 to whichever position I wanted to the right. But what if, like in some income tax situations, you needed to round to the dollar? Well, if I start at the decimal and go 1, 2, 3, going backwards the other way, I would go 3, 2, 1, 0. -1, -2, -3 would be to the thousands positions, like sometimes for financial statements. So for number of digits, I'm typing a 2. Close parentheses, Control-Enter. I'm going to copy it down, click in the last cell, Alt equals, and Enter. And sure enough, when I properly round it, which I'm required to do because this is money, these are actual amounts that are going to be subtracted. This is an actual amount we need to total and report on our tax form. There it is, a 1 penny difference. Now, the tax authority is not going to come after you for a penny. Nobody's really going to be harmed if it's a penny off. However, the reason that round is so important on invoices and payrolls and monetary calculations where we're going to be adding them up in a subsequent calculation is because if someone sees that you're off by a penny, they no longer trust your calculation. And here's the sad truth about Excel users on the planet Earth. Most people do not use round in the right situation. That's why we're looking at the round. So what do? When we are using money and we're required to round, we have extraneous decimals, and we're going to use the formula results in some subsequent calculation. You got to use round. There are the rules right there. One last note. Here, we didn't round these. But if these were just sitting off to the side, we were never going to use the result in another formula. That's perfectly all right. We're just looking at it. Because guess what? The number formatting displays it just like the round function actually returns the correct number. So if you're just looking at it, it's fine. But in our situation, we're using the result in a subsequent formula, so we had to round. Now, let's go look at our next example. We're going to build an amortization table. Now, as soon as people hear amortization table, people get nervous because they're oftentimes huge with lots of calculations, but not in Excel. It's quite easy to build an amortization table in Excel. All right. Here's our loan, $575,000. It's an N, which means the payment comes at the end of the period. There's a balloon payment at the end, $100,000. The annual rate is 4.75. 30-year consumer loan, number of periods per year. They have to pay monthly. Here's the first payment date. Now, we need to calculate the period rate because we're going to use the PMT function to figure out the monthly payment. And since the actual payment is monthly, we need monthly rate and total number of months. All right, you ready? The monthly rate is equal. And I'm going to up arrow to 4.75, and we're going to divide it into 12 parts. So divide and then up arrow, and enter. Now notice that is an unformatted decimal, which is perfectly fine. That's what we're going to use in our calculation. You could format it with percentage number formatting if you want. All right, total number of periods. I'm going to up arrow to 30 times and then 12 and enter. So 360. Now, how many people have memorized the annuity formula that's been around? I think it was Fibonacci back in maybe about the 12th century or something. I can't remember my exact year, but a long time this famous annuity formula has been in existence. Luckily, we don't have to have it memorized. We just use the PMT function. And you can read the screen tip. Calculates the payment for a loan based on constant payments and a constant interest rate. And that's what we have. So I'm going to hit Tab. Now, we read each one of the arguments here in our screen tip. If you're not quite sure what each one means, look at this. Right there on each function screen tip is a hyperlink. If I click on that, it opens up Help. And there, it'll tell you what each one of the arguments mean, including an example down below. I'm going to close that. The rate, that's the period rate. So I'm going to up arrow, comma, NPER, that's number of periods, up arrow, comma, present value. That means what is the current worth of the loan. Now, when you're using financial functions, whether PMT or FV for future value or PV for present value or rate for the rate or NPER to figure out number of periods, you have to know cash flow. Now, from the borrower's point of view, that cash flow, that's the present value, it's positive. Even though they immediately give it to the seller because they're buying a house, that cash flow comes in to the consumer's pocket as a positive cash flow from the bank. So I'm going to click on this present value, the loan amount up here, and enter it as a positive number. Now, comma, future value. That means at the very end, is this investment or is this annuity worth anything? Well, there is. There's still $100,000 left on the loan. Now, I can't just click on this 100,000 because, again, we have to think point of view. From the consumer's point of view, that balloon payment is coming out of their pocket, out of their wallet or purse, back to the bank. So I very carefully have to type a minus and then click on the 100,000. Comma, type, we have an end. Now, something very important about all functions in Excel, whenever you see the square brackets around a function argument, it means if you know the default, you can leave it out. Now, if you go to help, it'll tell you end is the default. So we don't even have to put that in. Now, you could double click the 0 and leave it in. In general, once I use functions a lot and I know what the default is, I do not bother because it saves a bunch of click. Now, comma. Be sure if you're going to leave it out to get rid of the comma too. And when you see it, no comma, type in square brackets, I want the default, that is fine. Close parentheses, Control Enter. Now, why is that a minus? These functions, no cash flow. Of course, each month, that amount is coming out of the borrower's pocket. All right, so we have our calculations up here. Now we need to build our amortization table. Now, I definitely don't want to type 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. I don't even want to calculate, or I'm sorry, not calculate, highlight, type two numbers in to establish a pattern, and then click and drag. That would give me all the way down to 360. No, there's a much better way. Simply type a 0. Now, there's two ways we can get this to automatically extend down to 360. The first way is to go to Home, over to Editing, and Fill Series. Now, I do this a lot, and I don't like to use my mouse and go up there. Since my mouse is usually real close, I simply go to the Fill handle, hover my cursor, and when I see the angry rabbit, I right-click, drag down one cell, drag back. And that opens up a secret menu, and I point to Series. Now, let me do that again. Angry rabbit, right-click, drag down, drag up, let go, point to Series. Since we want to fill down the column, you got to select columns. Oftentimes, I forget, and I'm in a hurry, and I come down here and fill out this, and then it shoots it throughout the row. I want this to go down the column. So I click Column. Step value is 1, and that is beautiful, 360. It will stop at 360. I click OK. Control down arrow. That is beautiful. I'm going to Control Home to jump all the way up to cell A1. Now, due, this is actually the due date. I'm going to hit F2 to put it in edit mode and put the cursor at the end, space, date, and enter. Enter. Now, the first date is 7/31/2017, 7/31/2017. Now, Control Enter, and watch this. I'm going to use this to double click. If I double click, it sent it all the way down, stopped at row 360 for this amortization table. But that's not what I want. I don't want every single day. I want end of the month for every single one. Well, that's where the Smart Tag is amazing. I hover over the downward pointing arrow, click, and I have all sorts of options. Fill weekdays. I could build a template with just weekdays. Months, that's the one we want. Years, I'm going to say months, and look at that. It knew to go to the end of the month, including, look at this, it knows leap year, 2/29/2020. Now, As you've noticed so far, I always have green cells while I'm teaching to differentiate between the raw data, the input data, and the cells with formulas. Almost always in your final reports, you don't want that. But I'll tell you something. When I build templates for my own use, I follow this convention because it just helps me figure it out. Now, I want to add some borders to this before I build any of the formulas. And I don't want to like highlight with my mouse and highlight all the way down. I don't even want to highlight here. And because the active cell is right there, I could Control-Shift down arrow. That highlights everything. I'm going to Control Backspace to jump back to the active cell. Here's the fastest way. Find asterisks on your number pad and do Control asterisk. Or if you don't have a number pad, you have to do Control-Shift-8. That's the fastest way to highlight the current table. Now, it wouldn't work if this template was touching there. If I Control asterisk here, what? It got everything else? Control Z. The way that keyboard works is that the empty cells are all the way around. So Control asterisk, I've highlighted the whole table. Now Control 1 to open up Format Cells. And there it is, Borders. Now, here's None. That will get rid of everything. I'm just going to click Outline and Inside. Well, wait a second. I already see that didn't work, so I'm going to click None. What I really wanted was just a thin line everywhere. So now I select my line. If I wanted to change the color, I'd select the color. Then I come over and click, click. To put them everywhere, click OK. Now, that's not quite what I want. A lot of accounting templates have these kind of lines everywhere, but then a double line to differentiate the columns. Now, notice when we highlight this, there's something around the outside. That's the outside. Inside the button we clicked went both directions. But notice we want just vertical. So we'll keep that in mind. Control 1. Outline did the whole outline. Inside did everything. But we want just that one line right there. Now, if we want them on the outside too, then we'd have to click all 3 vertical lines. No problem. Let's try that. Click on the double line. I select the line I want. Color, we could change it. Now, you could use these buttons right here. I pretty much never do those because I like to draw myself. I click on the line, click on the line. Be careful. If you click diagonally, it'll do diagonally. So I click a second time to get rid of them. And then there we go. Click OK. Click off to the side. Maybe that's not what you want. I'm just going to click on Balance, Control asterisk, Control 1. I think I want this medium line around the outside. So I'm going to say Outline, click OK. Now I click off to the side. That's more what I want. All right, so now we need Payment. Now notice Payment did come out negative, and in general in our amortization schedule, we don't show it as negative. So instead of typing equal sign, then negative, then clicking on the cell, way back in spreadsheet history, we didn't always use the equal sign. We could use the plus. We even way back had to use the at symbol. But just to save a key here, since I want a negative, I'm going to type just a negative sign, then click up here. Since I need the same number all the way down, I'm going to hit the F4 key to lock it. Now I'm going to Control Enter because I first off want to look up to the formula bar. Whoa, look at that. If I use a plus or a minus, it'll automatically put the equal sign in, which is convenient. And now I want to double click and send it down. So I'm going to double click with my angry rabbit all the way down. Control down arrow, F2, I'm verifying. And sure enough, that looks good. Escape, Control Home. Now the balance is what we need next. That, of course, is equal sign. And I'm going to click on the starting loan amount and enter. Interest. Well, there's a different interest each period. And it's simple how this works. That's the amount that's been sitting in the account for the month. So, of course, we multiply the period or monthly rate, in our case, times that. Now, as we go down, we will have a different balance because we'll subtract the principal reduction. So for every single interest paid, it'll always be one cell up, 2 cells to my right as a relative cell reference times the rate. So right here equals one cell up, two over as a relative cell reference, times, and I'm going to click on my rate, F4 to lock it. Now I'm going to hit Tab. I'm not going to copy this one down yet because I want to show you a cool trick. Now, principal reduction, equal sign. I take arrow, arrow. That's the full payment minus. That's a lot of interest in the early stages. So that's our formula, Tab. Our balance equal, well, whatever was above as a relative cell reference from the period before, subtract left arrow, whatever the reduction was for this month. Control Enter. Now, here's a great trick. We have three different formulas. I simply highlight all three, and there's my fill handle. When I see my Angry Rabbit, double click and send it down. There's the active cell. I'm going to control down arrow because I want to verify. F2, and sure enough, there it is, locked up on B8, and it's looking at the correct balance. Tab, F2, that's working. Tab, F2, that's working too. And notice there's the exact balloon payment. Now, if we were to properly round this, like we're probably supposed to, because this is dealing with money, this would be a few pennies off, right? You know, that last payment is always a few pennies off. But if you don't use the round function, of course it has to come out exactly that 100,000. Control Home. If we were to round, the only calculation we would need to round is this one. Actually, we can do this. I click before the payment. ROU. I see round, I tab. I very carefully come to the end, comma. We're dealing with money, so it's 2 to the penny. Close parentheses and Control Enter. That formula, of course, would be correct all the way down because it's always pointing there. This one actually has to be rounded also. We have lots of extraneous decimals. I could come over here, round, tab, very carefully at the end, comma 2, close parentheses. Control Enter. Double click and send it down. We do not have to round that because both of those are already rounded correctly, nor do we have to round that. Control down arrow, and we will be a few pennies or a dollar and a few pennies off. All right, Control Home. That's an amortization table. Now let's go over to our next sheet, Invoice. All right, I'm clicking on the sheet Invoice. And on this sheet, we want to learn how to build this invoice template. Now, here's our topics for this sheet, including the ever-important VLOOKUP function and data validation list to get a drop-down list in a cell. Now, VLOOKUP and the if function, we'll see both of these functions on this sheet are amongst the more important function. So I have a bunch of notes off to the side. Not only that, but we're only going to see one example of VLOOKUP. And since it's so important, I put reference videos down here for my Highline Excel class, which have 29 other examples of VLOOKUP and lookup functions. Now, here's our started template. We have the boomerang name, and we have the quantity here. Now, our first goal is to look up the price. Then we have to calculate line item total, and then our subtotal and invoice total. Now let's think about how we would look something up. If I asked you how to go get the price for flat top boomerang, you'd have no problem. Well, wait a second. We better scroll down. Now you'd have no problem. You'd actually look at the text flat top and go, oh, I need to go look up the price for flat top. You would know that the lookup table is down here. You'd race through the first column, find flat top, jump over to the second column. You'd see that it's $12.36. And then you'd come up here and type $12.36. Now, look at what we did fundamentally. Yes, we looked up the text flat top and found a match. But fundamentally, we went and got something and brought it back to the cell. That's what VLOOKUP does. Now, let's see how this works. I'm going to type equals VL. And there it is, VLOOKUP, tab. Now, why the V? Because most lookup tables are vertical. We're trying to find a match in the first column, and it's set up so we search it vertically. Now, the lookup value, that's just like we need to know which item to go and try and find in the first column. So I click on that as a relative cell reference. Now I type comma. Table array. The way I always remember what that argument is asking for is it has the word table. Yes, you need to tell it where the lookup table is. So I highlight. And this is one of these examples. You do not highlight the field names at the top, just the actual, in our case, products and then price. Now I need to lock this as I copy down, so I hit the F4 key, comma, column index number. Now, we would just know to read wholesale cost and go and get the price from the wholesale cost. But notice, we gave VLOOKUP an entire table. So we have to tell it which column number within this table, 1, 2. Now, this is a small table. Some tax tables or some employee information tables are huge. So we might look up in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, or whichever column. Ours happens to be 2. That means the thing we want to go and get and bring back to the cell is in the 2nd column. So we simply come up and type a 2. Now I type comma. And there's 2 types of lookup. Now, exact match is what we're doing. That means we look up, and the formatting is blocking that, but we look up exactly flat top and find exactly flat top. That's exact match. Approximate match is when you're looking up taxes or commissions. So you have to choose which one. And if you select true or select false, it tells VLOOKUP function which of the 2 VLOOKUPs to do. Now I'm going to down arrow and tab to put false in. Now I'm going to backspace for a second because true and false can be represented with 1 and 0. So that's the way I tend to do it. I'm doing exact match, so you can put false or type a 0. Close parentheses. Control Enter. NA. Yes, VLOOKUP is being polite. It means whatever it was looking up is not available. It could not find it. Now, we're looking at that, right? It looks like I see a flat top down here. But either it's spelled wrong here or here. So I'm going to start here. And the F2 key we've been using to put in edit mode, it's a great key because it will always put the cell in edit mode and put your cursor at the end. And in this case, we can clearly see someone mistyped it. If I backspace and now hit Enter, now VLOOKUP can do its job because flat top is matched with flat top. But that brings up an issue. I don't want humans to be messing up with an extra space. So every time you have a lookup table and your list of valid items that can go into the cell, we might as well use data validation drop-down list. Now I'm in an F2 and backspace and hit Enter. Now let's highlight this. And we're going to go up, not to Home, but over to the Data Ribbon tab. And over in Data Tools, there's something awesome called Data Validation. I'm simply going to click. Now, on some of your screens, this might be a really small icon like that right there. So you got to look for it. But if you hover, you'll see Data Validation. All right, I'm going to click Data Validation. Now, the default is any value. That means anytime you open up a spreadsheet with the 17 billion cells, every cell automatically allows you to put anything in the cell. But we want to validate what goes in. Now, this drop down here is amazing. You can validate a certain range of whole numbers, decimals, dates, times, length. But the one we want is list. So I select list, and there it is, the source. I simply highlight the valid items. And notice, look at that, in cell dropdown. And we want to ignore empty cells there. So we keep those checked and click OK. Now I am not going to be allowed to put flat top with a space. I simply select from the dropdown. You can type it also if you know it. Like I could type Bellin and then hit Enter. But if I had an extra space or something like that, it just wouldn't let me. If I typed this and hit Enter, it gives me a message. Now I'm going to click Escape, highlight all of this, go back up to Data Validation. You, by all means, can put an input message. That means as soon as you click on the cell, it gives you the input message, and you can type your own error message. I'll leave that for you to do. Now I'm going to delete this Bellin. Now we're going to copy this down, and we're going to run into trouble because NA, it is looking up nothing, an empty cell, and it can't find it over here. So we need to amend our formula because if this is a template, we need to be able to clear the template and use it again. No problem. We have to learn about the if function. Now, I'm going to hit F2 here. Notice here we want to run the VLOOKUP. But down here, what I would like is to have nothing in the cell. So for this whole column, I want to put one of two things in the cell. I either want to put the VLOOKUP or I want to put nothing in the cell. Anytime you have a situation where every single cell is going to have one of two things, that's the perfect job for the if function. Now, if you have the if function, you also have to find a logical test. Now, there's all sorts of possibilities here. I could ask the question, has anything been entered in the cell, true or false? If something's entered in the cell true, then I put the formula. Otherwise, I show nothing. If I wanted to use a different logical test, I could instead ask the question, is the cell empty? If the cell is empty, then please show nothing. Otherwise, that means if that logical test comes out false, please run the VLOOKUP. So I'm going to come up to the top here, F2, and right after the equal sign, I'm going to type IF tab. Now, the if function simply needs your logical test, and then the rest of it's easy. What do you want to put in the cell if it's true? What do you want to put in the cell if it's false? Now, again, there are many different possible logical tests here. I'm going to use the function ISB. Now, it should say is empty because the word blank is sometimes ambiguous. But really, if you look at the help, it says it checks to see whether the cell is empty. And if a relative cell reference, remember we're copying this down, if that relative cell reference contains nothing, meaning it's empty, it will return a true. Now, I'm going to come after that close parenthesis, and now I have to type a comma. Remember, we built our logical test to come out true when it's empty. So what do we want in the cell if it's empty? Well, we would like nothing, but there is no way to put nothing in the cell. There technically is no nothing function. So you have to use the syntax, double quote, double quote. Now I'm going to type a comma. There's the value of false. But let's go back to the value of true. Down here where there's nothing, every one of these cells will actually contain that double quote, double quote. It is the syntax we use to show nothing. Now, technically, it's called a zero-length text string because there will be text in the cell that has 0 length. But it is the syntax we use to show nothing. So there it is. Every cell will either get, when that comes out false, the VLOOKUP, or when it comes out true, the double quote to show nothing. Now I come to the end, close parentheses, Control-Enter, and I'm going to copy it down. That's pretty amazing. And watch what happens when I come over here. I select Quad. Instantly now that cell does not have double quote, double quote. The VLOOKUP is allowed to run. Now I can put 5 here. They bought 5. All right, so we did that part of our invoice template. Now let's do the line item total. Equal sign, left arrow times left arrow, left arrow. And we don't have any extraneous decimals here, so I'm not worried about any incorrect totals down here when we sum. Control-Enter. And now I'm going to copy it all the way down. Uh-oh. Now we get value error. Over here, we got not available because when it tried to look that up, it was not available. But value means that you either entered the wrong thing into a function or you're doing something with an operator like multiplying that you're not allowed to do. That is an empty cell. That is text. Now, I want to show you a trick here to prove that actually an empty cell inside a formula yields a 0. And that is just clearly going to be text. Let's escape for a second, and I want to go up to the Formulas tab, and there's an amazing feature called Evaluate Formula. If I click on this, it will actually step through and tell us what's happening with the formula. Now, C14 is underlined. That means when I click Evaluate or hit Enter, oh, look at that. It shows the double quote, which is a zero-length text string. Now it's going to evaluate the B14, which is the empty cell. When I hit Enter, oh, it's a 0. You are not allowed to take text and multiply it by a 0. Now, this is sort of an abstract example, but imagine if you tried to multiply the color red, meaning RED, times 3. Well, that doesn't make any sense. That's what a value error is. All right, I'm going to click Close or Escape. No problem. We will do the same test. If the cell is empty, then show nothing. Otherwise, run the formula. Now, here's a great trick. I'm going to put this cell into edit mode with F2, and I'm going to cheat. I'm going to highlight all of that. Control-C, Escape. Come here, F2. And right after the equal sign, I'm going to Control-V, because that's the same logical test we can use. It's just a different formula is going to be dumped in the cell if value is false. Close parentheses, Control-Enter, and copy it down. That is pretty amazing. We're learning how to build a template using the data validation and if is blank VLOOKUP, and then over here, if is blank and our formula. Now we can come down here, Alt equals Enter. That shipping cell is always going to be empty until you put something. So I type 15, and down here I want to Alt Enter. Oh, it guessed wrong. Remember, as long as the dancing ants are going, you're in full edit mode. Control Enter. Now to follow my convention, I held Control and clicked on both cells. I'm going to go up and just add a slightly different green. Now again, if this was a template, you probably wouldn't do that. But that's just telling us that the white cells have content, the green cells have formulas. And there is our template. There's the topics we covered. And notice I had round here, but because we didn't have any extraneous decimals, we didn't use it when we were multiplying. Now, if I got this spreadsheet, I, of course, would go Investigate. I would look down here, F2. Look at that. This is the wholesale cost. It's pointing down to this cell, F2. And sure enough, someone made a formula, list price, trade discount, and it's properly rounded. We also could have up here, notice it came with number formatting, so we should have done our Control-Shift-tilde to check it out if there were any extraneous decimals. Control-Z. All right, so that's an invoice. Let's go over to our next sheet, Mixed Cell References. Now, on this sheet, we want to build a template that will tell us for any intersecting cell what an investment of $4,000 at the end of each year at a given rate and a given number of years will be worth in the future. Now, in this case, we have a variable that's at the top of each column. So this whole column is going to need 2%. And we have at the head of each row the number of years. Now, we're going to use the future value function, and the inputs are simple. It'll be the annual amount, annual rate, and number of years. The problem is most Excel users on the planet Earth would have to create 11 different formulas, meaning we'd lock the rate and the 4,000, but we'd let the years move relatively. Then we'd create the next formula, same situation, locked, moved relatively, copy it down. We don't want to do that. What if there was a possibility? So right in this cell, we just lock the 4,000 in all directions because every one of these cells needs the 4,000. But for this column, as we copy down, we need it locked on the 1.5%, but we need this to move relatively. When we got down to this row, what if our cell reference, instead of being permanently locked on 1.5, it was just locked when we copied down. And when we copied it to the side, this cell reference would move to the new column header, and this one would remain locked on 11. We can do that with mixed cell references. Now, I've been teaching Excel for almost 2 decades, and this, without a doubt, is the hardest topic for people to get. I'm not quite sure why it's so hard, but I do know that when I learned, it was super hard. Now, let's just review. If we were looking at a relative cell reference, that's a bunch of cells that way. Control-Enter. I can copy it down, right? It moves relatively. If I was to copy it to the side, I see a 0 because it moved exactly as a relative cell reference. It moved to the right when I copied the formula to the right. So that's relative cell reference. But what if we locked it? Well, of course, F4, there's 2 dollar signs, and that's because there's a column reference and a row reference. More fundamentally, it's because there's 2 directions when we copy a formula, across the columns or down across the rows. So this one, when I Control-Enter, it doesn't matter where I copy it. I can copy it any direction, and it's always locked. Because when I copied it across the column, the A remained locked. When I copied it down across the rows, the 10 was locked. Now, Control-Z. Let's do that one more time. But in this case, let's hit the F4 key. And now we're going to see that the F4 key is really the merry-go-round key. If I keep hitting F4, 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 it's a merry-go-round. It toggles between relative, absolute, mixed cell reference with the row locked only, and mixed cell reference with the column locked only. So you can toggle between as much as you like. Let's stop and lock only the row. Now, when I copy it down, that 10 is not going to go anywhere. But when I copy it to the side, the A will be allowed to move to B. So Control-Enter. I'm just going to copy it down 1 and over. Down here, I could see F2, the 10 is locked. But when I come over here, F2, the A was allowed to move to B. Now let's try the other direction, F2. And I'm going to hit the F4 key one time. Now the A is locked. So as I copy it across the columns, the A will always remain locked. But there's no dollar sign in front of the 10. So when I copy down, it will move to 11, 12, and so on. Control-Enter. Copy it down and over. Now F2, there's a 10. Enter F2, it moved to 11. F2, there's an A. Tab F2, it's still A because the dollar sign locked it. Now, delete. Those are abstract examples. Let's go over and try our future value example with our future value function. Now, you can already see the situation. When I copy this down, I'm going to lock it on the row for the rate. But when I copy it to the side, we'll leave the column free to move. So notice it'll move from B to C, getting the next interest rate. And when we have our input from the year into our formula, we'll let the row remain free to move. But when it copies to the side, we will lock it on the A column. All right, let's try this. Equals FV. That stands for future value. It calculates the future value of some investment. Now, our rate, this is our annual rate. Now, watch this. As I copy down, I need it to be locked on 9. So I'm going to hit the F4 key once and twice. But when I copy it to the side, it needs to move from B9 to C9. So that will work. Comma. NPER, for us, it's number of years. So I click on A10. When I copy down, I need that 10 to move to 11 and 12. So I'm not putting a dollar sign in front of the 10. When I copy it to the side, I want A to remain on the A column. So I hit F4 1, 2, 3 times. That will work. Now we type a comma. And our annual payment at the end of each year is going to be this $4,000. But we're doing this from the point of view of the investor. So the investor has coming out of their pocket $4,000 each year. So we have to acknowledge that cash flow with a minus. So now I'm going to click on that 4,000, and that's locked in all directions, F4. comma. We do not have a present value. That would be any amount at time 0 in our account. This, in essence, is going to be a savings plan. So at the end of the upcoming year, we'll put our first amount in. Now, comma, type. This is end. So as we talked about before, I'm going to backspace. The default is end. I'm going to backspace again because I don't need present value either because there is none. Close parentheses. Control-Enter. Copy it to the side. Double-click and send it down. Immediately go to the diagonally furthest cell away. Click in that cell, F2, to verify that the cell references are working. And look at that. That is absolutely beautiful. I still remember the first time I did mixed cell references and how it transformed my ability to create templates like this quickly. There is the proper column header, 6%. There's the proper row header, 20 years. And sure enough, it's locked on 4,000. Now, one last thing. If we highlight all this and home general right there, I'll use the keyboard Control-Shift-tilde. We have all sorts of extra decimals there past the penny. But guess what? It doesn't matter here because we're not using any of these calculations in any subsequent calculations. So Control-Z. I'm going to leave it there. Each one of those we're just looking at. Now, let's go look at our next example. We're going to talk about the SUMIFS and COUNTIFS function, and we'll see another example of mixed cell references. Now, sometimes we want to add, and sometimes we want to count. But really, most of the time, we are not adding an entire column. Most of the time, we're adding from a data set with some conditions or criteria. So for Sue, if I look through this list, I can see there are 4 records for Sue. So really, I want to pick out these numbers and add them. But when I copy the formula down, I want the formula to then add for Amira and Chin and Monifa. Not only that, but I'd like to do the same thing for counting. Anytime you are adding or counting with conditions, there's a number of functions in Excel. For adding, we have to think of the word sum. So I type sum. And there's a real old function, SUMIF, without the S. That was before Excel 2007. Now we use SUMIFs because SUMIFs can do everything that SUMIF can do, plus much more. Now, SUMIF just adds with one condition. SUMIFs can add with one or more conditions. So I'm going to use that function and tab. Now, also, the reason we use SUMIFs instead of SUMIF without the S is the actual name of the argument makes it easier to interpret what you put into the function. Now, the first argument is SUMRANGE. That means please give me the column you want to potentially add. So I'm going to highlight this column right here and hit the F4 key to lock it in all directions. Comma, criteria range, and I'm going to type comma criteria. Notice that argument doesn't have the word range, backspace. That one does. That means you have to give it the entire column, in our case, sales rep. So I'm going to highlight sales rep and hit F4, comma. Now we put the criteria that SUMIFs can use to start picking out which records to use. For us, it's a relative cell reference. And that's the formula for adding with a single condition. Close parentheses, Control-Enter, and copy it down. Now, I clearly see Monifa over here. So just as we saw earlier in the video, you always have to be careful. We're typing these in, right? You got to make sure. F2, look at that, an extra space. I always leave little things like that when we shoot these videos because we got to remember to check those kind of things. If you get Control-Z, a 0 answer, that's good. That says there's either 0 as the answer or there's some trouble. Either you did your formula wrong or the input or the column, the actual data in the column is incorrect. For us, luckily, I can simply backspace and get rid of that extra space. Now, similar to SUMIFs, if we want to count, we use count. And there's a bunch of counting functions. Count counts numbers. Count counts not empty cells. Count blank, of course, counts empty cells. COUNTIF, that's the old one, and COUNTIFs is what we want. That means we're going to count if something is true. Criteria range, I'm simply going to highlight the entire column. F4, comma, and then I'm going to left arrow to get the criteria. Control Enter, and double click and send it down. I go to the last cell and hit F2. I should have done that over here too. F2, checking if all the cell references are looking right. Now those two formulas are adding and counting with a single condition. Here is what's called a cross-tabulated table. And for any intersecting cell, we want to look through the product, pick out TriFly, and then also look through sales rep and pick out Amira. Notice, just like our future value table, for this whole column, I need to look at the column header quad for product. But when I copy over, it needs to move to Belen. For this whole row, I need to look at Chin. But when I copy up, I need to move to Amira. So no problem. We're going to count. So equals count ifs. Anytime you're counting with one or more conditions, we can try the count ifs function. Now criteria range. Oh, wait a second. Which one do I put in first? Well, now that we're going to use multiple criteria, that means we're doing an AND logical test. So in order to find a count for Eagle Sue, the record has to find Sue as the sales rep and Eagle as the product. An AND logical test can be done in any order. So it doesn't matter which column I pick first. I'm going to pick sales rep first. So I highlight F4, comma, arrow to get Sue. Now think about this. As I copy down, I need the 11 to move to 12 and then to 13. But when I copy over to the next column, I need to stop the F from moving. So I'm going to hit the F4 key 1, 2, 3 times, and that will work. Comma. Second column is product, so I highlight. Hit the F4 key, comma, and up arrow. Now Eagle, as I copy this down, I need G10 to be locked. G10, 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 all the way down. But when I copy the whole formula to the side, the green cell needs to move from the G column to the H column to pick up the TriFly. So we're definitely not putting a $sign in front of the G, only in front of the 10. So I hit the F4 key once and twice. That formula will do it. Close parentheses, Control Enter. I'm going to copy it to the side, double click and send it down, go to the last cell, F2. I'm verifying that all of the cell references are working fine. Uh-oh, Monifa. I can't type Monifa's name. F2, backspace, and enter. Now, one important note about this cross-tabulated table, or even this small report up here. We actually, later in this video, will see how to create these reports with pivot tables. And pivot tables tend to be a little bit easier to create. The one advantage, F2, that formulas have over pivot tables is if the source data changes. There it is, 200. If I change this just for kicks to 5,000, watch what happens here when I hit Enter. It instantly updates. If it wasn't Chin but Sue, now the count down here and the count right there updates. That's the advantage of formulas. And sometimes in accounting and business, people want to build solutions that automatically update when the source data changes. Again, later we'll learn pivot tables, a little bit easier to create these. Now I'm going to Control ZZ to bring back the original 2 bits of data. All right, so that's a little bit about count ifs and sum ifs, and another look at mixed cell references. Now we want to go look at a great accounting example. We want to see how to build a checkbook register. And we'll see an interesting formula here. And we're going to see how to use mixed cell reference to help us reconcile. So anytime we put an X, meaning we found this in our bank statement, we not only want the X there, but we want the whole row to turn yellow. Now I'm going to Control Z. Now the first thing is let's highlight. And if I Control asterisk, that's not going to work here because I need my template to go down below all the way where there's nothing, because I'm going to copy the formula all the way down. So I manually highlighted that. Control 1, and just like we saw before, we're going to do border. I'm going to select a medium thick line and say outline. Then I'm going to click thin line, click on inside, go back and get my double line and click vertical. Now when I click OK, the outside has the dark border, horizontal has a single line, and vertical has the double line. Why is that hanging over? Well, it looks like it's right aligned and the column is not wide enough. So I'm going to click and drag, and there we go. Now let's first think about the formula for calculating the balance. So, and this is just one type of checkbook or one type of register where we potentially have a column for subtracting and a column for adding. Well, right here, since this is a subtraction, I need the one above minus the check. But when I get down to this cell right here, I need the one above plus the addition. Well, our template is always set up where for any record, it's either going to be one or the other. So here's our formula. Equals relative cell reference one cell above minus, and I'm going to arrow over to get as a relative cell reference the amount of the subtraction plus left arrow. Right here, it's a 0, so it won't matter. Down here, it'll pick up the 516, and it will subtract 0. So that's our formula all the way down. Control-Enter. Now, if I copy this all the way down, I'm pretty sure it's going to wreck our template. So if I click off to the side, you can see it got rid of that thick border. Smart Tag, totally awesome. Click the down arrow and say Fill without formatting. I totally remember when the Smart Tag came in Excel 2002. I had all these beautiful accounting templates with all these borders, and I would always wreck them. But when this Smart Tag came in, man, that is a lifesaver. Now, the problem is I don't want the balance down here. Well, we can do our same trick we did earlier. Here, I need to run the formula. Down here, when nothing has been entered, and I'm going to pick the date column, show nothing. Now, again, we have a choice here. We can test whether there is a number, because remember, dates are numbers, or we can test if the cell is empty. Since we did is blank, which checks for empty last time, this time I'm going to check and see if it's a number, F2. And right after the equal sign, I F tab. And in the logical test, I'm going to say is number. By the way, there's a bunch of is functions. So you can look through those. We looked at is blank, and now we're looking at is number. I'm going to click on the date, close parentheses, comma. Now, our logical test this time is asking, is this a number? Well, if it's a number, what do we want? There it is. We want the formula. So you see when you're building an if function to put one of two things in a cell, we have choices between logical tests. It's not that one is better than the other. In this case, is number or is blank would be equally reliable and efficient. Now I'm going to come to the end, comma. But in this case, if it comes out false, which means down here, that's not a number, I'm going to put double quote, double quote. That's a 0-length text string, which will show nothing. Close parentheses, Control-Enter, double-click and send it down. Immediately point to the Smart Tag and click on Fill Without Formatting. Now, just for kicks, we could come over here and is text. Sure enough, we could test. It looks like the cell is empty, but is text. Remember, 0-length text string. Control-Enter. Oops, I hit Enter. But there we go. We're proving that, in fact, that is text, even though it's the way we show nothing. Now we could test this. I come over here, 9/5/2010, tab, and instantly the formula shows up. Now, our last task here is to build this column to help us reconcile. Now, actually, it's two steps. We're going to do data validation drop-down list. I'm going to highlight this whole column, go up to data, over to data validation list. By the way, there's a keyboard for this. I use this all the time. And it's an Alt, A-L-T, the Alt key. It's an Alt keyboard. So you have to hit the Alt key. Whoa. When I hit the Alt key, all of these screen tips pop up reminding me how I get to each one of the ribbon tabs. So the letter A would get us to data, A. And look at this. V gets us to data validation, V. Oh, wait a second. Then I have to hit V again? Well, that would work. Now, remember, this is, I'm going to click Escape. Now, remember, this is a ribbon tab that was invented in Excel 2007. If we were in an earlier version, the keyboard was shorter. It was Alt-DL. And so that's the one I use to this day. When Excel 2007 came out, I, in essence, compared all of the new Alt keyboards to the earlier ones. If any of the earlier ones were shorter, I kept those. Now we go to Settings. And we're still going to use lists. But watch this. This is another great use. I can just type values separated by commas. And you could type a list. Now this is hard coding. So you want to only hard code them if the values are not going to change. But here, we don't even have a list. We just have one value. I just want to make it easy on myself. And since the conditional formatting is going to depend on the fact that there's an X there, I want to make sure that we validate it. So I click OK. Now I can come, and as I find these on the bank statement, I'm going to select my X's. And now we'll do the conditional formatting. By the way, I think I still have a template from the 90s that I still use using this same trick for reconciling. Why don't I show you this? Normally, when you first learn conditional formatting, you go to Home, and you just use the built-in features. Uh-oh, I didn't highlight all the way down. So highlight all the way down, go to conditional formatting, and highlight cell rules. I could simply come over and say cell value is equal to, and I could type an X. Now, I'm just going to keep the default and click OK. But that's not what I want. I want the whole row. And there is not a built-in feature to do the whole row. Anytime you have a conditional formatting task and it's not built in, you can use a logical formula, meaning true or false. Because what did conditional formatting do here? It asked the question, is there an X in each cell? So for each cell, I got true, I'm going to give you the formatting. False, you don't get the formatting. Now I'm going to Control Z on that because I don't want to keep that. Now think about this. This whole row needs to look at, for us, E11. But when we go down to the next row, this whole row needs to be looking at E12. If I were to come off to the side and simulate this, equals, and I'm going to click on E11. I can see my cell reference, so I hit F4 1, 2, 3 times. I'm locking the E, because when I copy it to the side, I do not want it to move off the letter E. But when it copies down, the 11 will move to 12. Now, I need to ask the question of that cell, are you equal to an X? So the way we do that is we use an equal sign. And we need to ask it whether it's equal to some text. And you cannot just type text into a formula because it'll think it's either a built-in function or a defined name or something like that. So instead, we have to use double quotes anytime we put text into a formula. So double quotes, are you equal to X? Right here, we'll get truth all the way across for the entire row. As I copy this down, this is what conditional formatting will see. So it'll get all these true, and it will know for this entire row to format it yellow. Down here, this does not contain an X, so it does not get the formatting. Now I'm going to leave this off to the side. It's not going to have anything to do with our formula. Let's highlight all the way the entire table. And very importantly, the active cell is in the upper left-hand corner. Now I go to Home, Conditional Formatting, and down to New Rule. Now I'm going to use a formula to determine which cells to format. Then I'm going to click in the format values where this formula is true. And I'm very carefully going to click on, notice active cell right there. The formula we create here in memory will be copied to every single cell and then down. But remember, for this whole row, we need to look at E11. Now, in the conditional formatting dialog box, it comes up by default locked. So I want to hit the F4 key once and twice. I want to lock only the E, but not the 11. Then I say, are you equal to, in double quotes, an X? Now I come over here and format. And you can use any of these tabs to format. I'm going to click yellow, click OK, click OK. That is totally amazing. Now when I use data validation dropdown, conditional formatting formats the entire row yellow, meaning we found this item on the bank statement. All right, so that is a cool checkbook example where we did an if formula, data validation with a typed in value, and conditional formatting with mixed cell references. Now I'm going to use my arrow to scroll over and show more sheets. And we want to go to the sheet Flash Fill. Now on the Flash Fill sheet, we got to talk about one of the more amazing features in modern Excel. This feature right here, Flash Fill, came in Excel 2013. And what it does is we oftentimes don't get our data in the form we want. Now, I just want first name or just last name and change the case. Now, we could use formulas. We could do it manually. But Flash Fill is absolutely amazing. Now, Flash Fill will try to recognize a pattern that we give it in a column next to the data set. Now, for first name, the pattern is very simple. Everything before the space. So all I have to do is type MO, enter. And as soon as I type a G, Flash Fill appears. This ghost list offers us the option to hit enter. And once we hit enter, it flash fills, extracting just the first name. Now, last name will work with two examples too, because it's going to be everything after the last space. So here I'm going to change the case. DIM, enter. And as soon as I type capital T, there it is, exactly all of the last names, and enter. Now, Microsoft describes Flash Fill as program by example. And the reason they describe it that way is because sometimes, like when we're trying to extract first and middle name, we're going to have to give it a bunch of examples. And then technically what happens behind the scenes is it writes a little code to extract our data. Again, these first two examples were easy. But if we want first and middle, notice there's no middle here. There's a middle name there. And down here, there's an initial with a period. Now, let's just try and see what happens. If I say Mo, enter, and then GG, it tried to extract first name, but now I'm going to keep typing. Albo, I'm thinking that I'm giving it enough examples because there's one with no middle name and one with a middle name. But when I hit enter and then capital A, it almost gives me what I want. If I hit enter, that would be fine as long as I didn't mind that it omitted the period. Because really, we needed to give it 3 examples so it could build a program behind the scenes. One with no middle name, one with a middle name without a period, and one with a period. So if I delete all this and I know my data well enough, I can go to any 3 cells where I need to supply the 3 examples. Cody space A period. Now when I hit enter, I can use the keyboard Control E, and it gets it exactly right. So in order to use Flash Fill, you have to know your data, and you have to give Flash Fill enough examples. Now, can we reverse putting last comma space first? Well, this one should be easy because it's just going to get everything before the first space and after the last space. So DIM, and I'm going to insert a character, which you're allowed to do. So comma space MO. And now when I enter and type capital T, it got it exactly right. Again, this was an easy example for Flash Fill to decipher. Now, here's another one that's going to be easy to decipher. If I have phone numbers and I want the right parentheses and spaces, I can simply Control-C, Control-V, and then put the correct parentheses in, space, and then an arrow over and a dash. Now, when I hit enter, as soon as I type open parentheses, this is another easy one for Flash Fill to figure out. Enter. Still another example. Here we have some asset IDs. And in order for us to import these into the database, they all have to have lead apostrophes. So watch this. I love this. We can simply type lead apostrophe 90513. And now when I hit enter and type a lead apostrophe, it knows what to do and enter. You can look up to the formula bar to verify. Another way that I use flash fill a lot, I copy and paste stuff from the internet. I just want the number, so 1574, enter. As soon as I type a 1, there it is, flash fill. I got all the numbers. So flash fill really is an amazing new feature that allows us to clean our data or extract data. Now, it is not dynamic like a formula would be, but when you have a one-time data cleaning or data extracting task, it's an amazing feature. Wow, that was a lot of amazing topics for our first video at this conference. We talked about flash fill, back on the sheet check register. We saw how to create an if formula, use data validation and conditional formatting to build a checkbook register. Over on SUMIFs, we saw how to add and count using SUMIFs and COUNTIFs when we have conditions or criteria. On the sheet mixed cell references, we talked about the amazing formula creation time saver mixed cell references. On the sheet invoice, we talked about using the VLOOKUP function and the IF function along with data validation to build an invoice. Back over on amortization table, we saw how to make various calculations to build an amortization template. Back on payroll quickly round, we talked about the importance of round in getting your calculations correct. Over on dates, number formatting, and formula sheet, we talked about formulas, functions, and number formatting for dates. And we started it all off by talking about the importance of using keyboards. Now, that's the end of video number 137 topics. Be sure to tune in for our next video, Excel for Accountants, where we talk about Power Query and pivot tables to import and clean data and build pivot table reports. All right, if you liked this video, be sure and click that thumbs up, comment, and subscribe. All right, we'll see you next video.